thing. Okay, that'd work. But why other thing no work? Why no cheese when live? Hello? Oh, there we go. Alright, that's an option. But I'm going to explore a bit. Yo, Edge. You know what? My apologies. We are going to do that. Yo, Sassy, what's up? Something truly wonderful has happened. Pray tell. What be? Fuck. Oh, my ears are so much more comfortable. You can make big pennies. Oh no. By what? By what sorcery have you been empowered thusly? Did I... 30 bits? 30 bits?! Oh, fuck. Your definition of wonderful and mine differ. Fuck off. Oh, we're about to hear an inscription. Sha. Yeah, our definitions of wonderful seem to differ. Oh, dear God. If you could hear your cackling right now, oh no. No, Edge, don't even think about it. Don't you fucking dare. I will go over to Ohio and personally kick your ass. Do not. Promise, but Wolfie. What? But Wolfie, what? Also, why is chat not showing up? Did I accidentally kill chat? I guess so. We've had this convo about me threatening to kick his ass. It's fruitless. Yeah. Unfortunately, you make a point with that. In the famous words of Zerp, God damn it! Looks like it's not available on mobile, thank goodness. I really do wonder why my shit's borked, though. Oh, now it works. What the fuck? Alright. Today, I have decided... I've heard a lot about this story, but I don't think I've read it. God damn it, Edge. Thank you for the salt. I actually want to read a Lovecraft story. Excuse me. Called The Color Out of Space. Salty tears for not being able to do it on mobile. They hitched up the prices of fucking... They hitched up the prices of subs, which I'm deeply displeased about. Sassy, the total today is 35. Don't fucking... God. Haven't I cried enough? Yeah, like, don't... Don't... You can also do this. That's worth 20 bits. I just saw that go in. Guys. Stop. No. 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 You have no clue what's going on right now. Sassy made her chat message go rainbow and the laughing emoji just cover the fucking screen. I have no idea if it'll show up on the VOD or not. Oh, please spend your money in a wiser fashion. Oh, terrible day. Terrible, terrible, terrible fates of Wolfie. What? But Wolfie what, Sassy? But Wolfie what? Скажи мне. Tell me, what? My happiness is worth me spending every penny. But Sassy, I can provide happiness for free. Don't agree! God damn it. Anyway. I would like to read The Color Out of Space. You're a gentleman and a scholar. You little chaos gremlins, you. What am I gonna do with you? Man, it's a good thing we locked down, because I just realized other people would hop on this bandwagon. Oh, and then I'd have more money. But, like... it's not worth it. Enjoy our amazing company. I do enjoy your amazing company, and I don't have to pay for it. You know what? One day, maybe we'll reopen the gates. If there's anyone left alive on the outside. If I ever really want to make money, I guess. Without regard to... I would have to suspend my care. Which is not easy. I'd have probably north of 800 bands, yeah. Well, those 800 people are not coming back. Except for maybe Trunky. Poor Trunky. Sorry, Trunky. Yeah. Poor guy. No clue who that is. He's been banned mistakenly at least twice. And I actually know the poor dude. He's from Sneaky's community, and he just likes to fall asleep to my streams. He's fine. He doesn't deserve to be banned. Especially because apparently when you ban someone now, they can't watch the stream. Well, okay. They can't watch the stream while logged in. What they can easily do is open an incognito tab and watch that way. But, whatever. It makes it slightly more difficult. And poor Trunky did not deserve that. Oh my god, these earphones are so much more comfortable now. Sassy MVP for finding these phone covers. Oh, my ears are so happy. You have no remorse. Yippee! Alright. I'm hoping I'm not getting a cold. That would suck. But the color out of space doesn't look too long. And I think it's the only, like, major story that I haven't read from the Necronomicon. Well, I read Call of Cthulhu. I read The Cats of Ulthar. I read Dagon. I've read The Hound. I think I've read Under the Pyramids. I've read Call of Cthulhu. Dreams of the Witch House, I read. I read The Shadow over Innsmouth. I think The Color Out of Space is like one of the last real ones that I have yet to read here. Oh, and The Dunwich Horror. I haven't read that one either. Allergies? Nah, my dad had got a sinus infection somehow. Actually, how long is The Dunwich Horror? Oh, fuck. Multiple chapters. Alright, we'll start with The Color Out of Space, yeah? Alright. West of Arkham, the hills rise wild, and there are valleys with deep woods that no axe has ever cut. There are dark, narrow glens where the trees slope fantastically, where the thin brooklets trickle without ever having caught the glint of sunlight. On the gentler slopes there are farms, ancient and rocky, with squat, moss-coated cottages brooding eternally over New England's secrets in the lee of great ledges. But these are all vacant now, the wide chimneys crumbling, and the shingled sides bulging perilously beneath low gamble roofs. The old folk have gone away, and foreigners do not like to live there. French Canadians have tried it, Italians have tried it, and the Poles have come and departed. It's not because of anything that can be seen or heard or handled, but because of something that is imagined. The place is not good for imagination, and does not bring restful dreams at night. It must be this which keeps the foreigners away, for old Ami Pierce has never told them of anything he recalls from the strange days. Ami, whose head has been a little queer for years, is the only one who still remains, or who ever talks of the strange days. And he dares to do this because his house is so near to the open fields and the traveled roads around Arkham. There was once a road over the hills and through the valleys that ran straight where the blasted heath is now. But people ceased to use it, and a new road was laid curving far toward the south. Traces of the old one can still be found amidst the weeds of a returning wilderness, and some of them will doubtless linger even when half the hollows are flooded for the new reservoir. Then the dark woods will be cut down, and the blasted heath will slumber far below blue waters, whose surface will mirror the sky and ripple in the sun. And the secrets of the strange days will be one with the deep secrets, one with the hidden lore of old ocean, and all the mystery of primal earth. When I went into the hills and vales to survey for the new reservoir, they told me the place was evil. They told me this in Arkham. And because that is a very old town full of witch legends, I thought evil must be something with which something which granddames had whispered to children through centuries. The name Blasted Heath seemed to me very odd and theatrical, and I wondered how it had come into the folklore of a Puritan people. Then I saw that dark westward tangle of glens and slopes for myself, and ceased to wonder at anything beside its own elder mystery. It was morning when I saw it, but a shadow lurked always there. The trees grew too thickly, and their trunks were too big for any healthy New England wood. There was too much silence in the dim alleys between them, and the floor was too soft for the dank moss and mattings of infinite years of decay. In the open spaces, mostly along the line of the old road, there were little hillside farms, sometimes with all the buildings standing, sometimes with only one or two, and sometimes with only a lone chimney or fast-filling cellar. Weeds and briars reigned, and furtive wild things rustled in the undergrowth. Upon everything was a haze of restlessness and oppression, a touch of the unreal and the grotesque, as if some vital element of perspective, or chiaroscuro, were awry. I did not wonder that the foreigners would not stay, for this was no region to sleep in. 'Twas too much like a landscape of Salvator Rosa, too much like some forbidden woodcut in a tale of terror. But even all this was not so bad as the Blasted Heath. I knew it in the moment I came upon it at the bottom of a spacious valley, for no other name could fit such a thing, or any other things fit such a name. It was as if the poet had coined the phrase from having seen this one particular region. It must, I thought as I viewed it, be the outcome of a fire. But why had nothing new ever grown out of those 5 acres of grey desolation that sprawled open to the sky, like a great spot eaten by the acid in the woods and fields? It lay largely to the north of the ancient road line, but encroached a little on the other side. I felt an odd reluctance about approaching, and did so at last only because my business took me through and past it. There was no vegetation of any kind on that broad expanse, but only a fine grey dust or ash, which no wind seemed ever to blow about. The trees near it were sickly and stunted, and many dead trunks stood or lay rotting at the rim. As I walked hurriedly by, I saw the tumbled bricks and stones of an old chimney and cellar on my right, and the yawning black maw of an abandoned well, whose stagnant vapors played strange tricks with the hues of sunlight. Even the long, dark woodland climb beyond seemed welcome in contrast, and I marveled no more at the frightened whispers of Arkham people. There had been no house or ruin near. Even in the old days, the place must have been lonely and remote. And at twilight, dreading to repass that ominous spot, I walked circuitously back down by the curving road on the south. I vaguely wished some clouds would gather, for an odd timidity about the deep sky voids above had crept into my soul. In the evening, I asked old people in Arkham about the Blasted Heath, and what was meant by that phrase, strange days, which so many evasively muttered. I could not, however, get any good answers, except that all the mystery was much more recent than I had dreamed. It was not a matter of old legendary at all, but something within the lifetime of those who spoke. It happened in the 80s, and a family had disappeared or was killed. Speakers would not be exact, and because they all told me to pay no attention to old Ami Pierce's crazy tales, I sought him out the next morning. having heard that he lived alone in the ancient tottering cottage where the trees first began to get very thick. 'Twas a fearsomely ancient place, and had begun to exude the faint miasmal odor which clings about houses that have stood too long. Only with persistent knocking could I rouse that aged man, and when he shuffled timidly to the door, I could tell he was not glad to see me. He was not so feeble as I had expected, but his eyes drooped in a curious way, and his unkempt clothing and white beard made him seem very worn and dismal. Not knowing just how he could best be launched on his tales, I feigned a matter of business, told him of my surveying, and asked vague questions about the district. He was far brighter and more educated than I had been led to think, and before I knew it I had grasped quite as much of the subject as any man I had talked with in Arkham. He was not like other rustics I had known in the sections where the reservoirs were to be. From him there was no protest at the miles of old wood and farmland to be blotted out, though perhaps there would have been had not his home lain outside the bounds of the future lake. Relief was all that he showed, relief at the doom of the dark ancient valleys through which he had roamed all his life. They were better under water now, better under the water since the strange days, and with this opening his husky voice sank low, while his body leaned forward, and his right forefinger began to point shakily and impressively. It was then I heard the story. As the rambling voice scraped and whispered on, I shivered again and again despite the summer day. Often I had to recall the speaker from ramblings, piece out scientific points which he knew only by fading parrot memory of professors' talk, or bridge over gaps where his sense of logic and continuity broke down. When he was done, I did not wonder that his mind had snapped a trifle, or that the folk of Arkham would not speak of the blasted heath. I hurried back before sunset to my hotel, unwilling to have the stars come out above me in the open, and the next day returned to Boston to give up my position. I could not go into that dim chaos of old forest and slope again, or face another time that grey blasted heath, where the black well yawned deep beside the tumbled bricks and stones. The reservoir will soon be built now, and all those elder secrets will be safe forever under watery fathoms, but even then I do not believe I would like to visit that country by night. At least not when the sinister stars are out, and nothing could bribe me to drink the new city water of Arkham. It all began, old Ami said, with the meteorite. Before that time there had been no wild legends at all since the witch trials, and even then these western woods were not feared half so much as the small island in the Miskatonic, where the devil held court beside a curious stone altar, older than the Indians. These were not haunted woods, and their fantastic dusk was never terrible till the strange days. Then there had come that white noontide cloud, that string of explosions in the air, and the pillar of smoke from the valley far in the wood. And by night all Arkham had heard of the strange rock that fell out of the sky and embedded itself in the ground beside the well at Nahum Gardner Place. That was the house which had stood where the blasted heath was to come, the trim white Nahum Gardner house amidst its fertile gardens and orchards. Nahum had come to town to tell the people about the stone, and dropped in at Ami Pierce's on the way. Ami was 40 then. Oh, whoops. I was voicing this as though he was talking about it. Ami was 40 then, and with all the queer things were fixed very strongly in his mind. He and his wife had gone with the 3 professors from the Miskatonic University, who hastened out the next morning to see what weird visitor from unknown stellar space, and had wondered why Nahum had called it so large the day before. It had shrunk, Nahum said, as he pointed out the big brownish mound above the ripped earth and charred grass near the archaic well sweep in his front yard. But the wise men answered that stones do not shrink. Its heat lingered persistently, and Nahum declared that it glowed faintly in the night. The professors tried it with a geologist's hammer and found that it was oddly soft. It was, in truth, so soft as to be almost plastic, and they gouged rather than chipped a specimen to take back to the college for testing. They took in an old pail borrowed from Nahum's kitchen, for even the small piece refused to grow cool. On the trip back, they stopped at Ami's to rest, and seemed thoughtful when Mrs. Pierce remarked that the fragment was growing smaller and burning the bottom of the pail. Truly it was not large, but perhaps they had taken less than they thought. The day after that, all of this was in June of '82. The professors had trooped out again in a great excitement. As they passed Ami's, they told him what queer things the specimen had done and how it had faded wholly away when they put it in a glass beaker. The beaker had gone too, and the wise men talked of the strange stone's affinity for silicon. It had acted quite unbelievably in that well-ordered laboratory, doing nothing at all and showing no occluded gases when heated on charcoal, being wholly negative in the borax bead, and soon proving itself absolutely non-volatile at any producible temperature, including that of the oxyhydrogen blowpipe. On an anvil it appeared highly malleable, and in the dark its luminosity was very marked. Stubbornly refusing to grow cool, it soon had the college in a state of real excitement. And when upon heating before the spectroscope, it displayed shining bands unlike any known colors of the normal spectrum. There was much breathless talk of new elements, bizarre optical properties, and other things which puzzled men of science, I want to say, when faced by the unknown. Hot as it was, they tested it in a crucible with all the proper reagents. Water did nothing. Hydrochloric acid was the same, nitric acid, and even aqua regia merely hissed and spattered against its torrid invulnerability. Ami had difficulty in recalling all these things, but recognized some solvents as I mentioned them in the usual order of use. There was ammonia and caustic soda, alcohol and ether, nauseous carbon disulfide, and a dozen others. But although the weight grew steadily less as time passed, and the fragments seemed to be slightly cooling, there was no change in the solvents to show that they had attacked the substance at all. It was a metal, though, beyond a doubt. It was magnetic for one thing, and after its immersion in an acid solvent, there seemed to be faint traces of the Woodmannsdaten, figures found on a meteoric iron. And the cooling had grown very considerable. The testing was carried out on glass, and it was in a glass beaker that they left all the chips made of the original fragment during the work. The next morning, both the chips and the beaker were gone, without a trace, and only a charred spot marked the place on the wooden shelf where they had been. All this the professors told Ami as they paused at his door, and once more he went with them to see the stony messenger from the stars, though this time his wife did not accompany him. It had now most certainly shrunk, and even the sober professors could not doubt the truth of what they saw. All around the dwindling brown lump near the well was a vacant space except for where the earth had caved in. And whereas it had been a good 7 feet across the day before, it was now scarcely 5. It was still hot, and the sages studied its surface curiously as they detached another and larger piece with a hammer and chisel. They gouged deeply this time. And as they pried away the smaller mass, they saw that the core of this thing was not quite homogeneous. They had uncovered what seemed to be the side of a large colored globule embedded in this substance. The color, which resembled some of the bands in the meteor's strange spectrum, was almost impossible to describe. It was only by analogy that they called it color at all. Its texture was glossy, and upon tapping it, appeared to promise both brittleness and hollowness. One of the professors gave it a smart blow with a hammer, and it burst with a nervous little pop. Nothing was emitted, and all trace of the thing vanished with the puncturing. It left behind a hollow spherical space about 3 inches across, and all thought it was probable that others would be discovered if the enclosing substance wasted away. Conjecture was vain, so after a futile attempt to find additional globules by drilling, the seekers left again with their new specimen, which proved, however, as baffling in the laboratory as its predecessor. Aside from being almost plastic, having heat, magnetism, and slight luminosity, cooling slightly in powerful acids, possessing an unknown spectrum, wasting away in air, and attacking silicon compounds with mutual destruction as a result. It presented no identifying features whatsoever, and at the end of the tests, the college scientists were forced to own that they could not place it. It was nothing of this earth, but a piece of the great outside, and as such, dowered with outside properties and obedient to outside laws. That night, there was a thunderstorm, and when the professors went out to Nahum's the next day, they met with bitter disappointment. The stone, magnetic as it had been, must have had some peculiar electrical property, for it had drawn the lightning, as Nahum said, with singular persistence. 6 times within an hour the farmer saw the lightning strike the furrow in the front yard, and when the storm was over, nothing remained but a ragged pit by the ancient well sweep, half choked with caved-in earth. Digging had borne no fruit, and scientists verified the fact of the utter vanishment. The failure was total. So nothing was left to do but go back to the laboratory and test again the disappearing fragment left carefully placed in lead. That fragment lasted a week, at the end of which nothing of value had been learned of it. When it had gone, no residue was left behind. And in time, the professors felt scarcely sure that they had indeed seen with waking eyes that cryptic vestige of the fathomless gulfs outside, that lone weird message from other universes and other realms of matter, force, and entity. As was natural, the Arkham papers made much of the incident with collegiate sponsoring, and sent reporters to talk with Nahum Gardner and his family. At least one Boston daily also sent a scribe, and Nahum quickly became kind of a local celebrity. He was a lean, genial person of about 50, living with his wife and 3 sons on the pleasant farmstead in the valley. He and Ami exchanged visits frequently, as did their wives, and Ami had nothing but praise for him after all these years. He seemed slightly proud of the notice his places attracted, and talked often of the meteorite in the succeeding weeks. That July and August were hot, and Nahum worked hard at his haying in the 10-acre pasture across Chapman's Brook, his rattling wain wearing deep ruts in the shadowy lanes between. The labor tired him more than it had other years, and he felt that age was beginning to tell on him. Then fell the time of fruit and harvest, The pears and apples slowly ripened, and as Nahum vowed that his orchards were prospering as never before. The fruit was growing to phenomenal size and unwanted gloss, and in such abundance that extra barrels were ordered to handle the future crop. But with the ripening came sore disappointment. For all of that gorgeous array of specious lusciousness, not one single jot was fit to eat. Into the fine flavors of the pears and apples had crept a stealthy bitterness and sickness, such that even the smallest bites induced a lasting disgust. It was the same with the melons and tomatoes, and Nahum sadly saw his entire crop was lost. Quick to connect events, he declared that the meteorite had poisoned the soil, and thanked heaven that most of the other crops were in the upland lot along the road. Winter came early and was very cold. Ami saw Nahum less often than usual and observed that he had begun to look worried. The rest of his family, too, had seemed to grow taciturn, and were far from steady in their church-going or their attendance at the various social events of the countryside. For this reserve or melancholy no cause could be found, though all the household confessed now and then to poor health and feeling a vague disquiet. Nahum himself gave the most definitive statement of anyone when he said he was disturbed about certain footprints in the snow. They were the usual winter prints of red squirrels, white rabbits, and foxes, but the brooding farmer professed to see something not quite right about their nature and arrangement. He was never specific, but appeared to think that they were not as characteristic of the anatomy and habits of squirrels and rabbits and foxes as they ought to be. Ami listened without interest to this talk until one night, when he drove past Nahum's house in his sleigh on the way back from Clark's Corners. There had been a moon, and a rabbit had run across the road, and the leaps of that rabbit were longer than either Ami or his horse liked. The latter, indeed, had almost run away when brought up by a firm rein. Thereafter, Ami gave Nahum's tales more respect, and wondered why the gardener dog seemed so cowed and quivering every morning. They had, it developed, nearly lost the spirit to bark. In February, the McGregor boys from Meadow Hill were out shooting woodchucks. And not far from the Gardner place, bagged a very peculiar specimen. The proportions of its body seemed slightly altered in a queer way, impossible to describe, while its face had taken on an expression which no one ever saw in a woodchuck before. The boys were genuinely frightened and threw the thing away at once, so that only their grotesque tales of it ever reached the people of the countryside. But the shying of horses near Nahum's house had now become an acknowledged thing, and all the bases for a cycle of whispered legend, and was fast taking form. People vowed that the snow melted faster around Nahum's than it did anywhere else, and early in March there was an odd discussion in Potter's General Store at the Clark's Corners. Stephen Rice had driven past Gardner's in the morning, and had noticed the skunk cabbages coming through the mud and by the woods across the road. Never were things of such size seen before, and they held strange colors that could not be put into any words. Their shapes were monstrous, and the horse had snorted out an odor which struck Stephen as wholly unprecedented. That afternoon, several persons drove past to see the abnormal growth, and all agreed that the plants of that kind ought never to sprout in a healthy world. The bad fruit of the fall before was freely mentioned. It went from mouth to mouth that there was poison in Nahum's ground. Of course it was the meteorite, and remembering how strange the men at the college had found the stone to be, several farmers spoke about the matter to them. One day they paid Nahum a visit, but having no love of the wild tales of folklore, were very conservative in what they inferred. The plants were certainly odd, but all skunk cabbage are more or less odd in shape and hue. Perhaps some mineral element from the stone had entered the soil, but of course would be soon washed away. As for the footprints and the frightened horses, of course this was mere country talk, which such a phenomenon as an aerolite would be certain to start. There was really nothing for serious men to do in cases of wild gossip, for superstitious rustics will say and believe anything. And so, all through the strange days, the professor stayed away in contempt. Only one of them, when given 2 files of dust for analysis in a police job over a year and a half later, recalled that the queer color of that skunk cabbage had been very much like one of the anomalous bands of light shown by the meteor fragment in the college spectroscope, and like the brittle globule found embedded in the stone from the abyss. The samples in this analysis gave the same odd bands at first, though later they lost the property. The trees budded prematurely around Nahum's, and at night they swayed ominously in the wind. Nahum's second son, Thaddeus, a lad of 15, swore that they swayed also when there was no wind, but even the gossips would not credit this. Certainly, however, restlessness was in the air. The entire Gardner family developed the habit of stealthy listening, though not for any sound which they could consciously name. The listening was indeed rather a product of moments when consciousness seemed to half slip away. Unfortunately, such moments increased week by week, till it became common speech that something was wrong with all of Nahum's folks. When the early saxifrage came out, it had another strange color, not quite that of the skunk cabbage, but plainly related and equally unknown to anyone who saw it. Nahum took some blossoms to Arkham and showed them to the editor of the Gazette, but that dignitary did no more than write a humorous article about them, in which the dark fears of the rustics were held up to polite ridicule. It was a mistake of Nahum's to tell a stolid city man about the way the great overgrown mourning cloak butterflies behaved in connection with these saxifrages. April brought a kind of madness to the country folk, and began that disuse of the road past Nahum's, which led to its ultimate abandonment. It was the vegetation. All the orchard trees blossomed forth in strange colors, and though the stony soil of the yard and adjacent pasturage, there sprang up a bizarre growth, which only a botanist could connect with the proper flora of the region. No sane, wholesome colors were anywhere to be seen, except in the green grass and leafage. But everywhere were those hectic and prismatic variants of some diseased, underlying primary tone without a place among the known tints of earth. The Dutchman's breeches became a thing of sinister menace, and the bloodroots grew insolent in their chromatic perversion. Ami and the gardeners thought that most of the colors had sort of a haunting familiarity, and decided they reminded one of the brittle globule in the meteor. Nahum plowed and sowed the 10-acre pasture and the upland lot, but did nothing with the land around the house. He knew it would be of no use, and hoped that the summer's strange growths would draw out all the poison from the soil. He was prepared for almost anything now, and had grown used to the sense of something near him waiting to be heard. The shunning of his house by neighbors told on him, of course, but it told on his wife more. The boys were better off, being at school each day, but they could not help being frightened by the gossip. Thaddeus, an especially sensitive youth, suffered the most. In May, the insects came, and Nahum's place became a nightmare of buzzing and crawling. Most of the creatures seemed not quite usual in their aspects and motions, and their nocturnal habits contradicted all former experience. The gardeners took to watching at night, watching in all directions at the random for something. they could not tell what. It was then that they all owned that Thaddeus had been right about the trees. Mrs. Gardner was the next to see from the window as she watched the swollen boughs of a maple against the moonlit sky. The boughs surely moved, and yet there was no wind. It must be the sap. Strangeness had come into everything growing now. Yet it was none of Nahum's family at all who made the next discovery. Familiarity had dulled them, and what they could not see was glimpsed by a timid windmill salesman from Bolton, who drove by one night in ignorance of the country legends. What he told in Arkham was given a short paragraph in the Gazette, and it was there that all farmers, Nahum included, saw it first. That night had been dark and the buggy lamps faint, but around a farm in the valley, which everyone knew from the account must be Nahum's, the darkness had been less thick. A dim though distinct luminosity seemed to inhere in all the vegetation, grass, leaves, and blossoms alike. While at one moment a detached piece of the phosphorescence appeared to stir furtively in the yard near the barn. The grass had so far seemed untouched, and the cows were freely pastured in the lot near the house. But toward the end of May, the milk began to be bad. Then Nahum had the cows driven to the uplands, after which this trouble ceased. Not long after this change in grass and leaves became apparent to the eye. All the verdure was going gray, and was developing a highly singular quality of brittleness. Ami was now the only person who ever visited the place, and his visits were becoming fewer and fewer. When school closed, all the gardeners were virtually cut off from the world, and sometimes let Ami do their errands in town. They were failing curiously, both physically and mentally, and no one was surprised when the news of Mrs. Gardner's madness stole around. It happened in June, about the anniversary of the meteor's fall, and the poor woman screamed about things in the air which she could not describe. In her raving, there was not a single specific noun, but only verbs and pronouns. Things moved and changed and flutters, and ears tingled to impulses which were not wholly sounds. Something was taken away. She was being drained of something. Something was fastening itself on her that ought not to be. Something must make it keep off. Nothing was ever still in the night. The walls and windows shifted. Nahum did not send her to the county asylum, but let her wander about the house as long as she was harmless to herself and others. Even when her expression changed, he did nothing. But when the boys grew afraid of her, and Thaddeus nearly fainted at the way she made faces at him, he decided to keep her locked in the attic. Oh, God. Bad. Nahum's family seems to have bad judgment. Like, they could have just moved. By July, she had ceased to speak and crawled on all fours, and before the month was over, Nahum got the mad notion that she was slightly luminous in the dark, as he now clearly saw was the case with the nearby vegetation. It was a little before this that the horses had stampeded. Something had aroused them in the night, and their neighing and kicking in their stalls had been terrible. There seemed virtually nothing to do to calm them. And when Nahum opened the stable door, they all bolted out like frightened woodland deer. It took a week to track all four. And when found, they were seen to be quite useless and unmanageable. Something had snapped in their brains, and each one of them had to be shot for its own good. Nahum borrowed a horse from Ami for his haying, but found it would not approach the barn. It shied, balked, and whinnied. And in the end, he could do nothing but drive it into the yard, while the men used their own strength to get the heavy wagon near enough to the hayloft for convenient pitching. And all the while the vegetation was growing gray and brittle. Even the flowers whose hues had been so strange were graying now. And the fruit was becoming gray and dwarfed and tasteless. The asters and goldenrod bloomed gray and distorted, and the roses and zinnias and hollyhocks in the front yard were such blasphemous-looking things that Nahum's oldest boy, Zenas, cut them down. The strangely puffed insects died about that time. Even the bees had left their hives and taken to the woods. By September, all vegetation was fast crumbling into a grayish powder. And Nahum feared the trees would die before the poison was out of the soil. His wife now had spells of terrific screaming, and the boys were in a constant state of nervous tension. They shunned people now, and when school opened, the boys did not go. But it was Ami, on one of his rare visits, who realized that the well water was no longer good. It had an evil taste. It was not exactly fetid, nor exactly salty, and Ami advised his friend to dig another well on higher ground to use till the soil was good again. Nahum, however, ignored the warning, for he had at that time become calloused to strange and unpleasant things. He and the boys continued to use the tainted supply, cooking in it as listlessly and mechanically as they ate their meager and ill-cooked meals and did their thankless and monotonous chores through aimless days. There was something of stolid resignation about all of them, as if they walked half in another world between lines of nameless guards to a certain and familiar doom. Thaddeus went mad in September after a visit to the well. He had gone with a pail and come back empty-handed, shrieking and waving his arms, sometimes lapsing into an inane titter whisper about the moving colors down there. 2 in one family was pretty bad, but Nahum was very brave about it. He let the boy run about for a week until he began stumbling and hurting himself. And then he shut him in the attic room across the hall from his mother's. The way they screamed at each other from behind their locked doors was very terrible, especially to little Merwin, who fancied they talked in some strange, terrible language that was not of earth. Merwin was getting frightfully imaginative, and his restlessness was worse after the shutting away of the brother, who had been his greatest playmate. Around the same time, the mortality among the livestock commenced. Poultry turned grayish and died very quickly, their meat being found dry and noisome upon cutting. Hogs grew inordinately fat, and then suddenly began to undergo loathsome changes which no one could explain. Their meat was, of course, useless, and Nahum was at his wit's end. No rural veterinary would approach his place, and the city veterinary from Arkham was openly baffled. The swine began growing gray and brittle and falling to pieces before they died, and their eyes and muzzles developed singular alterations. It was very inexplicable, for they had never been fed from the tainted vegetation. Then something struck the cows. Certain areas, or sometimes the whole body, would be uncannily shriveled or compressed, and atrocious collapses or disintegrations were common. In the last stages, and death was always the result, there would be a graying and turning brittle, like that which beset the hogs. There could be no question of poison, for all the cases occurred in a locked and undisturbed barn. No bites of prowling things could have brought upon the virus, for what live beast of earth can pass through solid obstacles? It must only be natural disease, yet what disease could wreak such results was beyond any mind's guessing. When the harvest came, there was not an animal surviving on the place, for the stock and poultry were dead, and the dogs had run away. These dogs, 3 in number, had all vanished one night and were never heard of again. The 5 cats had left some time before, but their going was scarcely noticed, since there now seemed to be no mice, and only Mrs. Gardner had made pets of the graceful felines. On the 19th of October, Nahum staggered into Ami's house with hideous news. The death had come to poor Thaddeus in his attic room, and had come in a way which could not be told. Nahum had dug a grave in the railed family plot behind the barn, and had put therein what he found. There could have been nothing from outside, for the small barred window and locked door were intact. But it was much as it had been in the barn. Ami and his wife consoled the stricken man as best they could, but shuddered as they did so. Stark terror seemed to cling around the Gardners, and all they touched, in the very presence of one in the house, was a breath from regions unnamed and unmanageable. Ami accompanied Nahum home with the greatest reluctance, and did what he might to calm the hysterical sobbing of little Merwin. Zenas needed no calming. He'd come of late to do nothing but stare into space and obey what his father told him. And Ami thought that his fate was very merciful. Now and then Merwin's screams were answered faintly from the attic, and in response to an inquiring look, Nahum said that his wife was getting very feeble. When night approached, Ami managed to get away, for not even friendship could make him stay in that spot when the faint glow of the vegetation began, and the trees may or may not have swayed without wind. It was really lucky for Ami that he was not more imaginative. Even as things were, his mind was bent ever so slightly, but he had been able to connect and reflect upon all the portents around him. He must inevitably have turned a total maniac. In the twilight he hastened home, the screams of the mad woman and the nervous child ringing horribly in his ears. 3 days later, Nahum burst into Ami's kitchen in the early morning, and in the absence of his host, stammered out a desperate tale once more, while Mrs. Pierce listened in a clutching fright. It was little Merwin this time. He was gone. He'd gone out late at night with a lantern and pail for water, and he'd never come back. He'd been going to pieces for days and hardly knew what he was about. Screamed at everything. There had been a frantic shriek from the yard then, but before the father could get to the door, the boy was gone. There was no glow from the lantern he had taken, and of the child himself, no trace. At the time, Nahum thought that the lantern and pail were gone too, but when dawn came, and the man plodded back from his all-night search of the woods and fields, he found some very curious things near the well. There was a crushed and apparently somewhat melted mass of iron, which had certainly been the lantern, while a bent handle and twisted iron hoops beside it, both half-fused, seemed to hint at the remnants of the pail. That was all. Nahum was past imagining. Mrs. Pierce was blank, and Ami, when they had reached home and heard the tale, could give no guess. Merwin was gone, and there would be no use in telling the people around, who shunned all gardeners now. No use either in telling the city people at Arkham, who laughed at everything. Thaddeus was gone, and now Merwin was gone. Something was creeping and waiting to be seen and heard. Nahum would go soon, and he wanted Ami to look after his wife and Zenas if they survived him. It must all be a judgment of some sort, though he could not fancy what for, since he had always walked uprightly in the Lord's ways so far as he knew. For over 2 weeks, Ami saw nothing of Nahum. And then, worried about what might have happened, he overcame his fears and paid the gardener's place a visit. There was no smoke from the great chimney, and for a moment the visitor was apprehensive of the worst. The aspect of the whole farm was shocking. Grayish, withered grass and leaves on the ground, vines falling in brittle wreckage from the archaic walls and gables, and great bare trees clawing up at the grey November sky with a studied malevolence, which Ami could not but feel had come from some subtle change in the tilt of the branches. But Nahum was alive after all. He was weak, and lying on a couch in a low-ceiled kitchen, but perfectly conscious and able to give simple orders to Zenas. The room was deadly cold, and Ami visibly shivered. The host shouted huskily to Zenas for more wood. Wood indeed was sorely needed, since the cavernous fireplace was unlit and empty, with a cloud of soot blowing all about in the chill wind that came down the chimney. Presently Nahum asked him if the extra wood had made him any more comfortable, and then Ami saw what happened. The stoutest cord had broken at last, and the hapless farmer's mind was proof against more sorrow. Oh. Questioning tactfully, Ami could get no clear data about the missing Zenas. In the well, he lives in the well, was all that clouded father would say. Then there flashed across the visitor's mind a sudden thought of the mad wife, and he changed his inquiry. Navi, why, here she is, was the surprised response of poor Nahum. And Ami saw that he must search for himself. Leaving the harmless babbler on the couch, he took the keys from the nail beside the door and climbed into the creaking stairs of the attic. It was very close and noisome up there, and no sound could be heard from any direction. Of the 4 doors in sight, only one was locked. He tried various keys on the ring he had taken. The 3rd key proved the right one, and after some fumbling, Ami threw open the low white door. It was quite dark inside, for the window was small and half obscured by crude wooden bars. And Ami could see nothing at all on the wide planked floor. The stench was beyond enduring, and before proceeding further, he had to retreat to another room and return with his lungs filled with breathable air. When he did enter, he saw something dark in the corner, and upon seeing it more clearly, he screamed outright. While he screamed, he thought a momentary cloud eclipsed the window, and a second later he felt himself brushed, as if by some hateful current of vapor. Strange colors danced before his eyes, and he had not a present horror numbed him. He would have thought of the globule in the meteor, and that geologist's hammer had shattered, and of the morbid vegetation that had sprouted in the spring. As it was, he thought only of the blasphemous monstrosity which confronted him, which all too clearly had shared the same nameless fate of young Thaddeus and the livestock. But the very terrible thing about the horror was that it slowly and perceptibly moved as it continued to crumble. Ami would give no added particulars of the scene, but the shape in the corner does not reappear in his tale as a moving object. There are things which can't be mentioned. What is done in common humanity is sometimes cruelly judged by the law. I gathered that no moving thing was left in that attic room, and to leave anything capable of motion there would have been a deed so monstrous as to damn any accountable being to eternal torment. Anyone but a stolid farmer would have fainted or gone mad. But Ami walked conscious through the low doorway and locked the accursed secret behind him. There would be no whom to deal with now. He must be fed and tended and removed to some place where he could be cared for. Commencing his descent of the dark stairs, Ami heard a thud below him. He thought his scream had suddenly been choked off, and recalled, nervously, the clammy vapor which had brushed by him in that frightful room above. What presence had his cry and entry stirred it up? Halted by some vague fear, he heard still further sounds below. Indubitably, there was a sort of heavy dragging, and a most detestably sticky noise, as some fiendish and unclean species of suction, with an associative sense goaded to feverish heights. He thought, unaccountably, of what he'd seen upstairs. Good God! What eldritch dream world was this into which he had blundered? He dared move neither backward nor forward, but stood there trembling at the black curve in the boxed-in staircase. Every trifle of the scene Damn it, eyes. Hold on. My eyes got dry of reading. Give it a sec. There we go. Every trifle of the scene burned itself into his brain. The sounds, the sense of dread expectancy, the darkness, the steepness of the narrow steps. Merciful heaven. The faint but unmistakable luminosity of all the woodwork in sight. Steps, sides, exposed laths and beams alike. Then there burst forth a frantic whinny from Ami's horse outside, followed at once by a clatter which told of a frenzied runaway. In another moment, horse and buggy had gone beyond earshot, leaving the frightened man on the dark stairs to guess what had sent them. But that was not all. There had been another sound out there. A sort of liquid splash. Water. It must have been the well. He'd left Hero untied near it, and a buggy wheel must have brushed the coping and knocked in a stone. And still the pale phosphorescence glowed in that detestably ancient woodwork. God, how old this house was. Most of it built before 1670, and the gambrel roof no later than 1730. A feeble scratching on the floor downstairs now sounded distinctly, and Ami's grasp tightened on a heavy stick he had picked up in the attic for the same purpose. For some purpose. Slowly nerving himself, he finished his descent and walked boldly toward the kitchen. But he did not complete the walk, because what he sought was no longer there. It had come to meet him, and it was still alive after a fashion. Whether it had crawled or whether it had been dragged by any external forces, Ami could not say. But the death had been at it. Everything had happened in the last half hour, but collapse, graying, and disintegration were already far advanced. There was a horrible brittleness, and dry fragments were scaling off. Ami could not touch it, but looked horrifiedly into the distorted parody that had been a face. What was it, Nahum? What was it? He whispered, and the cleft, bulging lips were just able to crackle out a final answer. Nothing. The color, it burns. Cold and wet, but it burns. It lived in the well. I seen it. A kind of smoke, just like the flowers last spring. The well shone at night. That and Merwin and Xenis. Everything alive. Sucking life out of everything. And that stone must have come out of that stone. Pleasing the whole place. Don't know what it wants. The round thing that men from the college dug out in the stone. They smashed it. Was the same color. Just the same. Like the flowers and plants. Must have been more of them seeds. Seeds. They growed. I seen it the first time this week. Must have gotten stung on Xenis. He was a big boy full of life. It beats down your mind and then gets you. Burns you up. In the well water. You was right about that evil water. Xenis never come back from well. Can't get away. Draws you. You know something's coming, but 'tain't no use. I seen it time and time again since Xenis was took. Where's Nabby on me? My head's no good. Don't know how long since I fed her. It'll get her if we ain't careful. Just a color. Her face is getting to have that color sometimes toward night. And it burns and sucks. It come from some place where things ain't as they is here. One of them professors said so. He was right. Look out on me. It'll do something more. Sucks the life out. But that was all. That which spoke could speak no more, because it had completely caved in. Ami laid a red-checked tablecloth over what was left, and reeled out the back door into the fields. He climbed the slope to the 10-acre pasture and stumbled home by the north road and the woods. He could not pass that well from which his horses had run away. He looked through the window, and had seen that no stone was missing from the rim. Then the lurching buggy had not dislodged anything at all. The splash had been something else. Something which went into the well after it had done with poor Nahum. When Ami reached his house, the horses and buggy had arrived before him, and thrown his wife into fits of anxiety. Reassuring her without explanations, he set out at once for Arkham and notified the authorities that the Gardner family was no more. He indulged no details, but merely told of the deaths of Nahum and Nabby, that of Thaddeus being already known, and mentioned that the cause seemed to be the same strange ailment which had killed the livestock. He also stated that Merwin and Xenis had disappeared. There was considerable questioning at the police station, and in the end, Ami was compelled to take 3 officers to the Gardner farm, together with the coroner, the medical examiner, and the veterinary, who had treated the diseased animals. He went, much against his will, for the afternoon was advancing, and he feared the fall of night over that accursed place. But it was some comfort to have so many people with him. The 6 men drove out in a Democrat wagon, following Ami's buggy, and arrived at the Pesterton farmhouse at 4 o'clock. Used as the officers were to gruesome experiences, not one remained unmoved at what was found in the attic and under the red-checked tablecloth on the floor below. The whole aspect of the farm, with its gray desolation, was terrible enough. But those two crumbling objects were beyond all bounds. No one could look long at them, and even the medical examiner admitted that there was very little to examine. Specimens could be analyzed, of course, so he busied himself in obtaining them. And here it develops that a very puzzling aftermath occurred at the college laboratory, where the 2 vials of dust were finally taken. Under the spectroscope, both samples gave off an unknown spectrum, in which many of the baffling bands were precisely like those which the strange meteor had yielded in the previous year. The property of emitting this spectrum vanished in a month, and the dust thereafter consisting mainly of alkaline phosphates and carbonates. Ami would not have told the men about the well if he had thought that they meant to do anything then and there. It was getting towards sunset, and he was anxious to be away. But he could not help glancing nervously at the stony curb by that great sweep, and when a detective questioned him, he admitted that Nahum had feared something down there, so much so that he had never even thought of searching in it for Merwin and Zenas. After that, nothing would do but that they empty and explore the well immediately, so Ami had to wait trembling while pail after pail of rank water was hauled up and splashed onto the soaking ground outside. The men sniffed in disgust at the fluid, and toward the last held their noses against the fetor they were uncovering. It was not so long a job as they had feared it would be, since the water was phenomenally low. There's no need to speak to exactly what they found. Merwin and Zenas were both there in part, though the vestiges were mainly skeletal. There were also a small deer and a large dog in about the same state, and a number of bones of small animals. The ooze and slime at the bottom seemed inexplicably porous and bubbling, and a man who descended on handholds with a long pole found that he could sink the wooden shaft to any depth in the mud of the floor without meeting any solid obstruction. Twilight had now fallen, and lanterns were brought from the house. Then, when it was seen that nothing further could be gained from the well, everyone went indoors and conferred in that ancient sitting room, while intermittent light of a spectral half-moon played wanly on the grey desolation outside. The men were frankly nonplussed by the entire case, and could find no convincing common element to link the strange vegetable conditions, the unknown disease of livestock and humans, and the unaccountable deaths of Merwin and Zenas in the tainted well. They had heard the common country talk, it's true, but could not believe that anything contrary to the natural law had occurred. No doubt the meteor had poisoned the soil, but the illness of persons and animals who had eaten nothing grown in that soil was another matter. Was the well water? Very possibly. Might be a good idea to analyze it. But what peculiar madness could have made both boys jump into the well? Their deeds were so similar, and the fragments showed that they had both suffered from the grey, brittle death. Why was everything so grey and brittle? 'Twas the coroner, sitting near a window overlooking the yard, who first noticed the glow about the well. Night had fully set in, and all the aberrant ground seethed faintly luminous, with more than the fitful moonbeams. But this new glow was something definitive and distinct. It appeared to shoot up from the black pit like softened ray from a searchlight, giving dull reflections in the little ground pools where the water had been emptied. It had a very queer color, and as all the men clustered round the window, Ami gave a violent start. For the strange beam of ghastly miasma was to him of no unfamiliar hue. He had seen that color before, and feared to think of what it might mean. He had seen it in the nasty brittle globule in that air light 2 summers ago, He'd seen it in the crazy vegetation of the springtime, and had thought he had seen it for an instant in that very morning against the small barred window of that terrible attic room, where nameless things had happened. It flashed there a second, and a clammy and hateful current of vapor brushed past him, and then poor Nahum had been taken by something of that color. He said so at the last. Said it was like the globule in the plants. And after that had come the runaway in the yard and the splash in the well. And now that well was belching forth into the night a pale and insidious beam of the same demoniac tint. It does credit to the alertness of Ami's mind that he puzzled even at that tense amount over a point which was essentially scientific. He could not wonder at his gleaming of the same impression from a vapor glimpsed at the daytime against a window opening on the morning sky, and from nocturnal exhalations seem as phosphorescent mist against the black and blasted landscape. It wasn't right. It was against nature. And he thought of those terrible last words of his stricken friend. It come from some place where things ain't ours, they is here. One of them professor said so. All three horses outside, tied to a pair of shriveled saplings by the road, were now neighing and pawing frantically. The wagon driver started for the door to do something, but Ami laid a shaky hand on his shoulder. "Don't go out there," he whispered. "There's more to this nor than what we know. Nahum said something lived in the well that sucks your life out. He said it must be some that growed from a round ball just like the one we'd seen in the meteor stone that fell a year ago June. Sucks and burns, he said, and it's just a cloud of color like that night out there now. And you can hardly see and can't tell what it is. Nahum thought it feeds on everything living and gets stronger all the time. He said he'd seen it this last week. Must be something from far away off in the sky, like the man from the college last year says the meteor stone was. The way it's made and the way it works ain't like no way of God's world. It's something out from beyond." So the men paused indecisively at the light, as the light from the well grew stronger and the hitched horses pawed and whinnied in increasing frenzy. It was truly an awful moment, with terror in that ancient and cursed house itself. 4 monstrous set of fragments, 2 from the house and 2 from the well, in the woodshed behind, and that shaft of unknown and unholy iridescence from the slimy depths in front. Ami had restrained the driver on impulse, forgetting how uninjured he himself was after the clammy brushing of that colored vapor in the attic room. But perhaps it's just as well as he acted the way he did. No one will ever know what was abroad that night, and that the blasphemy from beyond had not so far hurt any human of unweakened mind. There's no telling what it might have done at that last moment, with its seemingly increased strength and the special signs of purpose it was soon to display beneath that half-clouded moonlit sky. All at once, the detectives at the window gave a short, sharp gasp. The others looked at him, and then quickly followed his own gaze upward to the point at which its idle straying had suddenly been arrested. There was no need for words. What had been disputed in country gossip was disputable no longer, and it is because of the thing which every man of the party had agreed in whispering later on, that the strange days are never talked about in Arkham. It's necessary to premise that there was no wind at that hour of the evening. One did not arise long afterward, but there was absolutely none then. Even the dry tips of the lingering hedge mustard, gray and blighted, and the fringe on the roof of the standing Democrat wagon were unstirred. And yet, amid that tense, godless calm, and the high bare boughs of all the trees in the yard were moving. They were twitching morbidly and spasmodically, clawing in convulsive and epileptic madness at the moonlit clouds, scratching impotently in the noxious air, as if jerked by some allied and bodiless line of linkage, with subterranean horrors writhing and struggling below the black roots. Not a man breathed for several seconds. Then a cloud of darker depth passed over the moon, and the silhouette of clutching branches faded out momentarily. At this, there was a general cry, muffled with awe, but husky and almost identical from every throat. For the terror had not faded with the silhouette, and in a fearsome instant of deeper darkness, the watcher saw, wriggling at the tree-top height, 1,000 tiny points of faint and unhallowed radiance, tipping each bough like the fire of St. Elmo or the flames that come down on the apostles' heads at Pentecost. It was a monstrous constellation of unnatural light, like a glutted swarm of corpse-fed fireflies dancing hellish sarabands over an accursed marsh. And its color was the same nameless intrusion, which Ami had come to recognize and dread. All the while, the shaft of phosphorescence from the well was getting brighter and brighter, bringing to the minds of the huddled men a sense of doom and abnormality, which far outraised any image their conscious minds could form. It was no longer shining out, it was pouring out. And as the shapeless stream of unplaceable color left the well, it seemed to flow directly into the sky. The veterinary shivered and walked to the front door to drop the heavy extra bars across it. Ami shook no less and had to tug and point for lack of controllable voice when he wished to draw notice to the growing luminosity of the trees. The neighing and stamping of the horses had become utterly frightful, but not a soul of that group in the old house would have ventured forth for any earthly reward. With the moments, the shining of the trees increased, while their restless branches seemed to strain more and more toward verticality. The wood of the well sweep was shining now, and presently a policeman dumbly pointed to some wooden sheds and beehives near the stone wall in the west. They were commencing to shine too, though the tethered vehicles of the visitors seemed so far unaffected. Then there was a wild commotion and clopping in the road, and as Ami quenched the lamp for better seeing, they realized that the span of frantic grays had broken their sapling and run off with the Democrat wagon. The shock served to loosen several tongues, and embarrassed whispers were exchanged. "It spreads on everything organic that's been around here," muttered the medical examiner. No one replied, but the man who had been in the well gave a hint that his long pole must have stirred up something intangible. "It was awful," he said. "There was no bottom at all, just ooze and bubbles and the feeling of something lurking under there." Ami's horse still pawed and screamed deafeningly in the road outside, and nearly drowned its owner's faint quaver as he mumbled his formless reflections. "It come from that stone. It growed down there. It got everything living. It fed on itself on them, mind and body. That and Merwin and Zenas and Nabby. Naum was the last. They all drunk the water. It got strong on them. It came from beyond where things ain't like they've been here. Now it's going home." At this point, the column of unknown color flared suddenly stronger and began to weave itself in fantastic suggestions of shape, into which the spectator later described differently. there came from a poor tethered hero such a sound as no man before or since heard from a horse. Every person in that low-pitched sitting room stopped his ears. Dami turned away from the window in horror and nausea. Words could not convey it. When Ami looked out again, the hapless beast lay huddled inert on the moonlit ground, between splintered shafts of the buggy. That was the last of Hero till they buried him the next day. But the present was no time to mourn, for almost at this instant a detective silently called attention to something terrible in the very room with them. In the absence of lamplight, it was clear that a faint phosphorescence had begun to pervade the entire apartment. It glowed on the broad-planked floor and the fragment of rag carpet, and shimmered over the sashes of the small-paned windows. It ran up and down the exposed corner posts, coruscated about the shelf and the mantel, and infected the very doors and furniture. Every minute saw it strengthen, and at last it was very plain that healthy living things must leave that house. Ami showed them the back door and the path through the fields to the 10-acre pasture. They walked and stumbled as if in a dream, and did not dare look back till they were far away on high ground. They were glad of the path, for could not have gone the front way by that well. It was bad enough passing the glowing barn and sheds, those shining orchard trees with their gnarled, fiendish contours, but thank heaven the branches did their worst twisting high up. The moon went under some very black clouds as they crossed the rustic bridge over Chapman's Brook, and it was blind groping from there to the open meadows. No, there's no sexual themes. We're good. When they looked back toward the valley, the distant Gardner place at the bottom, they saw a fearsome sight. All the farm was shining with the hideous unknown blend of color, trees, buildings, and even the grass and herbage, as had not been wholly changed to lethal gray brittleness. The boughs were all straining skyward, tipped with the tongues of foul flame, and the lambent tricklings of the same monstrous fire were creeping up about the ridge-poles of the house, barn, and sheds. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, and over all the rest reigned a riot of luminous amorphousness, that alien and undimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and malignly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. Then, without warning, the hideous thing shot vertically up toward the sky like a rocket or meteor, leaving behind no trail and disappearing through a round and curiously regular hole in the clouds before any man could gasp or cry out. No watcher can ever forget that sight, and Ami stared blankly at the stars of Cygnus, Deneb twinkling above the others, where the unknown color had melted into the Milky Way. But in his gaze was the next moment called swiftly to earth by the crackling in the valley. It was just that. Only a wooden ripping and crackling, not an explosion, as so many others of the party vowed. Yet the outcome was the same. For in one feverish, kaleidoscopic instant, there burst up from that doomed and accursed farm a gleamingly eruptive cataclysm of unnatural sparks and substance, blurring the glance of the few who saw it, and sending forth to the zenith a bombarding cloudburst of such colored and fantastic fragments as our universe must needs disown. Through quickly reclosing vapors, they followed that great morbidity that had vanished, and in another second they had vanished too. Behind and below was only a darkness to which the men dared not return, and all about was a mounting wind which seemed to sweep down in black, uproar gusts from interstellar space. It shrieked and howled and lashed the fields and distorted woods in a mad cosmic fury, till soon the trembling party realized it would be no use waiting for the moon to show what was left down there at Nahum's. Too awed even to hint theories, the 7 shaking men trudged back toward Arkham by the North Road. Ami was worse than his fellows and begged them to see the inside of his own kitchen, instead of keeping straight on to town. He did not wish to cross the blighted, wind-whipped woods alone to his home on the main road, for he had had an added shock that the others were spared, and was crushed forever with a brooding fear he'd dread not even mention for many years to come. As the rest of the watchers on that tempestuous hill had stolidly set their faces toward the road, Ami had looked back an instant at the shadowed valley of desolation, so lately sheltering his ill-starred friend. And from that stricken, faraway spot, he had seen something feebly rise, only to sink down again, upon the place from which the great shapeless horror had shot into the sky. It was just a color, but not any color of the earth or heavens, because Ami had recognized that color. He knew that this last faint remnant must still lurk down there in the well. He's never been quite right since. Ami would never go near that place again. It is 44 years now since that horror happened, but he's never been there. We'll be glad when the new reservoir blots it all out. I shall be glad too, for I do not like the way the sunlight changed color around the mouth of that abandoned well I passed. I hope the water will always be very deep, but even so, I shall never drink it. I do not think I shall visit the Arkham country hereafter. 3 of the men who had been with Ami returned the next morning to see the ruins by daylight, but there were not any real ruins. Only the bricks of the chimney, the stones of the cellar, some minerals and metallic litter here and there, and that rim of that Nifandrous well, save for Ami's dead horse, which they towed away and buried, and the buggy which they shortly returned to him. Everything that had ever been living had gone. 5 eldritch acres of dusty gray desert remained, nor has anything ever grown there since. To this day it sprawls open to the sky like a great spot eaten by acid in the woods and fields, and the few who have ever dared glimpse it in spite of rural tales have named it the Blasted Heath. The rural tales are queer. They might be even queerer if city men and college chemists could be interested enough to analyze the water from that disused well, or the gray dust that no wind seems to disperse. Botanists, too, ought to study the stunted flora on the borders of that spot, for they might shed light on the country notion that the blight is spreading little by little, perhaps an inch a year. People say the color of the neighboring herbage is not quite right in the spring, and wild things leave queer prints in light winter snow. Snow never seems quite so heavy on the Blasted Heath as it is elsewhere. Horses, the few that are left in this motor age, grow skittish in the silent valley, and hunters can't depend on their dogs too near that splotch of grayish dust. They say the mental influences are very bad too. Numbers went queer in the years after Nahum's taking. And always they lacked the power to get away. Then the stronger-minded folk all left the region, and only the foreigners tried to live in the crumbling old homesteads. They could not stay, though, and sometimes one wonders what insight beyond ours their wild, weird stories of whispered magic have given them. Their dreams at night, they protest, are very horrible in that grotesque country. And surely the very look of the dark realm is enough to stir a morbid fancy. No traveler has ever escaped a sense of strangeness in those deep ravines. and artists shiver as they paint thick woods whose mystery is as much of the spirit as of the eye. I myself am curious about the sensation I derived from my one lone walk before Ami told me his tale. When twilight came, I vaguely wished some clouds would gather. For an odd timidity about the sky voids above had crept into my soul. Do not ask me for my opinion, I don't know. That is all. There was no one but Ami to question, for Arkham people will not talk of the strange days, and all three professors who saw the air light and its clouded globule are dead. There are other globules, depend on that. One must have fed itself and escaped. Probably there was another, which was too late. No doubt it's still in the well. I know there's something wrong with that sunlight I saw above the miasmal brink. The rustics say the blight creeps an inch a year, so perhaps there's a kind of growth or nourishment even now. But whatever daemon is hatching there must be tethered to something, or else it would quickly spread. Is it fastened to the roots of those trees that claw the air? One of the current Arkham tales is about fat oaks that shine and move as they ought not to do at night. What it is, only God knows. In terms of matter, I suppose the things Ami described would be called gas. But this gas obeys the laws that are not of our cosmos. This was no fruit of such worlds and sun as shine on the telescopes and photographic plates of our observations. There was no breath from the skies, whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure, or deem too vast to measure. It was just a color out of space. A frightful messenger from unformed realms of infinity beyond all nature as we know it. From realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with the black extracosmic gulfs it throws opened before our frenzied eyes. I doubt very much if Ami consciously lied to me, and I do not think his tale was all a freak of madness as the townsfolk had forewarned. Something terrible came to the hills and valleys on that meteor, and something terrible, I know not in what proportion, still remains. I shall be glad to see the water come. Meanwhile, I hope nothing will happen to Ami. He saw much of the thing, and its influence was so insidious. Why has he never been able to move away? How clearly he recalled those dying words of Nahum's. Can't get away, draws you. You knew something's coming, but tain't no use. Ami is such a good man. Such a good old man. When the reservoir gang gets to work, I must write the chief engineer to keep a sharp watch on him. I would hate to think of him as the gray, twisted, brittle monstrosity which persists more and more in troubling my sleep. Alright, that was a good one. It was longer than I thought it was, though. God damn, how long have I been at this? It doesn't tell me! You binary! Drink water, I will. 148? Jesus Christ. Whew. Well, HPL was not known for his brevity. Noisy unit, though. Okay. Yeah, I think I spent all that I could on that story. All right, I have a funny one to finish this off. This is from Strange Tales from his Chinese studio. It's called The Wine Insect. A Mr. Lin of Changshan was extremely fat and so fond of wine that he would often finish a pitcher by himself. However, he owned about 50 acres of land, half of which was covered in millet. And being well off, he did not consider that his drinking would bring him into trouble. One day, a foreign Buddhist priest saw him and remarked that he appeared to be suffering from some extraordinary complaint. Mr. Lin said nothing was the matter with him, whereupon the priest asked him if he often got drunk. Lin acknowledged that he did. The priest told him that he was afflicted by the wine insect. "Dear me," cried Lin, in great alarm. "Do you think you could cure me?" The priest declared that there would be no difficulty in doing so, but when Lin asked him what drugs he intended to use, the priest said he should not use any at all. He then made Lin lie down in the sun, and tying his hands and feet together, he placed a stoup of good wine about half a foot from his head. By and by, Lin felt a deadly thirst coming on, and the flavor of wine passing through his nostrils seemed to set his vitals on fire. Just then he experienced a tickling sensation in his throat, and something ran out of his mouth and jumped into the wine. On being released from his bonds, he saw that it was an insect about 3 inches in length. It wriggled about in the wine like a tadpole, and had mouth and eyes all complete. Lin was overjoyed and offered money to the priest, who refused to take it, saying all he wanted was the insect, which he later explained to Lin was the essence of wine, and which, on being stirred up in the water, would turn it into wine. Lin tried this and found that it was so, and ever after he detested the sight of wine. He subsequently became very thin, and so poor that he had hardly enough to eat and drink. What the fuck? Wait, why did he become poor? That's not explained. Oh well. Okay. Give me just a second, chat. I am changing gears. He'd save a mint on all the alcohol he isn't drinking, right? So we'll do a little bit of birding on the stream. How's that? Oh, whoops. Yeah, I always like changing it back to this. And that should be the same. All right, chat. Birds in the forest, birds with cavities, birds with no eggs, and white birds. Shit. Ah. Okay. Nothing here is worth throwing over. Yeah, nothing here is worth throwing over. I'm gonna grab you, and I'm gonna grab you. Alright, so you can start with that. I'm gonna go ahead and... I'll make that work. It's not perfect. Oh shit, why do I have a rat that I'm not gonna use? Alright. Yeah, that's super helpful. I don't want to do that. That I'm cool with. Okay, you I'll do. I need something else. You are not helpful. You are also not helpful. Shit. Alright. No. That's better than nothing. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's fine. White powers. Okay. Either way... Okay, that's fine. I don't have eggs, motherfucker. That's fine. Oh shit, I didn't see you. Oh fuck. Oh, I gotta prioritize that now. I gotta do you. I'll take the silver eye. Pick a dude and then pick the... Uh-oh. This... Okay. I miscalculated. Shit. Yeah, alright. I'm not surprised by how that went. I'm just disappointed. Okay, I want you, and you'll do. No, okay, that's fine. I actually do need that now. I'm not gonna actually do that. I don't love that I did that, but I will tuck you. Okay, I need to get this out here. Okay, at least there we'll have it. Okay, okay. I should have this in terms of tucked. I do need to be careful about... Oh. I'm gonna do this. I'm actually gonna sack you to get yet another. I'm not gonna need you. birds with no eggs. Nobody has any more eggs, so we should be okay. Oh. This might be a loss. Although I'm not sure how much more aggressively I could have played that. Yeah. I don't think we won this one, chat. Okay, we definitely have him in Nectar. Oh shit, never mind. Oh, the tucked cards, huh? Oh Jesus, hello Zelda. We'll do one more. I say it almost every time and I almost always win. Yeah. As many do behind this to buy it. You're expensive. In my hand. I'm not very attractive to that. I'm not gonna lie. Shit. I probably should have taken that first. Damn it. That's not ideal. Oh, that's deeply not ideal. Shit. None of you are helpful. Okay. Okay. Oh, that would have been nice to have before. Fuck. Well, there's dick we can do about that now. Cool. Very cool. Fucking awesome. Okay, anyone worth throwing for? don't need to do that, so I'm not gonna. Ta-da. I need eggs. Oh, I am a fool. I am a deeply foolish fool. Oh, fuck. Oh my god, I am truly the most foolish fool that ever fooled. Okay, don't do stupid things, Wolfie. Oh, well that... Oh shit. Okay. Ah. I'm hoping that's enough. It wasn't enough. Alright, this is okay. Oh boy, okay. Very good. Oh, finally. Okay. I have 2 left that I can move here. What do you need? I'm shocked that that's actually working. Okay, homeboy, that would have been really helpful before, but it's not helpful now. Okay. That should put us pretty solidly ahead in terms of nectar. Okay, we've won that out, so we just need... Oh boy. We need a lot more beaks to the right. That shouldn't be difficult. Damn, he's doing really well. Let's put you there. Who can I afford? You, maybe. Okay. Maybe. Oh, right. That doesn't really matter, but thanks. So he dominated in terms of nectar. Alright, that's a tie. There are worse things. Nice. We got him on expensive. Alright, that's where I'm gonna call it, because I'm tired. And I have shit to do tomorrow. But in the meantime, do not eat or drink any questionable substances. Make smart decisions to not die. Dying is absolutely forbidden, and I will see all of you wonderful people at a later time. Take care, guys. До свидания for now.